Inquisitor Kryptman. Written by Lindsay Paton. Read by Adam Nicol. Following is a non-profit fan reading of a short story found in White Dwarf, issue 131.
Inquisitor Kryptman pushed back the huge pile of papers, removed his reading glasses, and rubbed his eyes warily. He had been working hard all night, trying to make sense of the mass of reports coming in from all over the sector. As usual, the room was chilly. His young aide Corell had lit a small fire, but it wasn't vigorous enough to warm the high-ceilinged office. He got up from his straight-back chair, stretched his long, sinewy limbs, and walked over to the window. It was a cold winter afternoon, and it would be dark in a couple of hours. Kendrick's world was an unwelcoming place, its people backward and intensely superstitious. The Imperial presence here was only a gesture. This world had nothing much to offer, except solitude, perhaps, since it was located on the fringe of one of the spiral arms of the human galaxy. Kryptman had no aversion to solitude, preferring the company of his own cold thoughts to the comradeship of others. He had travelled here to continue the Inquisition's investigations into the phenomenally high levels of unrest in the sector. The reasons were far from clear, and now a missing marine chapter had to be added to the ever-growing list of planetary revolts and of gene-stealer infestation. Still, at least the austere regime of the Imperial stronghold, a converted monastery, was to be welcomed. He had imposed a rigorous new timetable on the staff, and discipline had been greatly improved as a result. Since the discovery of the strange organic weapon and Borshak's unpleasant death, he had been uneasy. Kryptman was not psychic, but he trusted his intuition, and he couldn't help feeling that all these events were somehow related. But so far, the connection had eluded him, and Borshak's dying face continued to haunt his dreams. He looked through the narrow window and saw a shower of meteors arcing through the pale sky, dark trails of smoke spiring behind them. They had been falling for a week now, and the locals had been getting very excited, spouting all sorts of stupid nonsense about the end of the world. 400 years' instruction in the Imperial cult had obviously been a complete waste of time. With a snort of disgust, Kryptman turned his attention back to the tottering stack of reports. 10 miles down the valley, a lone meteor shrieked through the cold evening air. Its impact with the hillside created a small crater, and its heat charred like a black ring in the surrounding heather. A nauseating smell, like carbonized meat, rose from the meteorite, which was roughly ovoid in shape and about 2 feet high. Curiously, its ridged and watery form was more like some kind of bloated alien organ than a lump of sterile rock. After a few minutes, the meteorite toppled over on its side. A large native game bird approached and peered at it with one greedy eye. The cancerous-looking thing shook again, faint sounds emanating from within. The bird stalked closer, until it was right next to the meteorite, which still trembled spasmodically. The bird raised its beak and plunged it straight down into the meteorite, splitting it open like overripe fruit. A spray of yellow juice burst out, and a formless creature catapulted onto the bird, engulfing it in a glistening organic mass. It was all over very quickly. The creature wrapped itself tightly round its prey, compressing it, absorbing it. No feather or claw was wasted. As it contracted around the bird, a trickle of blood and bodily fluids trickled out, turning the charred ground into a disgusting bloody black mud. Slow changes came over the creature's body as it developed a more consistent appearance. An embryonic spine and rib cage erupted from amid obscenely pulsating organs. Its pallid skin darkened and sprouted stubby feathers. With prolonged sucking noises, a thick neck and head worked their way out from the top of the creature, while strong clawed legs sprouted from underneath. A stubby tail elongated from its spine, and two beady eyes popped into existence. For an hour or so, it lay on the ground, twitching its new limbs, recovering from the ordeal of its metamorphosis. Finally, it lurched unsteadily to its feet and shook its body like a wet dog might do, shaking off a little hail of ash, bone fragments, and bloody saliva. The creature now resembled a hideous mismatch of embryo bird and insect. Raising its powerful head, it sniffed the air, then loped off over the heather and rocks into the twilight gloom.
Cool. This place is cold, cold and hard. Clear air carries scent well. Little life all around. Animals, birds. Stupid, slow, good for eating. Hungry. Need more food. Need more bulk. We must hunt. Many large life upwind. Find the place of stone. Find and kill the prey.
Kryptman did not look up at the knock at his door.
Come in!
He shouted, irritated. Karel, his young aide, came into the office carrying a pile of papers in his thin arms. He shut the door quietly and advanced in silence to Kryptman's desk, too much in awe to speak. Kryptman scratched his signature onto the bottom of the form and replaced the pen in a gargoyle-shaped inkwell.
Well, what is it?
He asked, looking up. The latest batch of reports from the outlying posts. The communications problem is getting worse, and we've lost contact with former outposts. The engineers we sent out haven't been heard of since they left. Kryptman didn't like this at all. News from the outposts was inevitably inconsequential. He wouldn't miss it. What did increasingly worry him was why there was no communication. The comm lines on this world were so simple that they almost never malfunctioned. An oppressive sense of foreboding weighed down on the Inquisitor. Everything was falling to pieces around him. Equipment malfunctioning, locals becoming hysterical, communication through the warp being obstructed. Most worrying of all, the Lamenter's marine chapter was missing and couldn't be contacted. The Imperial stronghold was becoming increasingly cut off from the rest of the planet, and now from the Imperium as well. Kryptman did not believe in coincidences, but it was at times like this that tested the mettle of the loyal servants of the Imperium. He straightened his black Dassaman jacket, adjusting the formal collar so it lay more comfortably around his neck.
Put the reports down here.
He indicated a free space on his cluttered desk. Karel looked more worried than usual. The boy was a born warrior, but he had a good tidy mind for one so young. Given time, the Inquisitor knew he could mold this young man into a loyal and dependable Imperial servant. Feeling a little guilty about his earlier abruptness, he asked, "What's the matter, Karel? Is something bothering you?" "I know you told me not to mention local gossip, sir, but it's meteor storms and all the other odd things which have been going on."
"Things! Be more specific, Karel. Inexactitude is a sign of confused thinking."
"I can't, sir. It's only rumours. A number of locals horribly murdered. That lamb over Rakish Way that bit a boy's head off. A monster dog that's been terrorising hill farmers on the west side. More."
"Enough!
"It's just the odd incident which has been blown out of proportion by the farmers. You shouldn't take it so seriously, Karel. Meteors are a simple phenomenon. They don't signify the end of the world. In future, please try to raise yourself above the level of your superstitious ancestors. I suggest you learn the first 70 verses of the Canticles of Catechism to clear your head. Besides, I'm far more concerned about what's happening to the Lamenters and what's causing this communications breakdown. Have Astropath Farron report to me immediately. Hurry now." Karel gave a half bow and then scuttled off, the studded wooden floor banging heavily behind him. Alone, Kryptman's feeling of foreboding returned. He told Karel that all these stories of mutilated corpses and rampaging monsters were sheer superstitious hysteria. But who was he trying to convince? Karel or himself? The locals, though superstitious, were remarkably pragmatic and unimaginative. These strange happenings must have some basis in fact, although he couldn't begin to imagine what. Everything was so vague. Were the meteors carrying some sort of virus that infected animals and turned them mad? Ought he overlook the possibility of some sort of chaos activity in the region? There is only a tiny incidence of emergent psychers on Kendrick's world, so it seemed unlikely that they would have attracted any attention from the warp. And the sparse population and relative unimportance of the world suggested it would have been of little interest to chaos cultists. The lights flickered and dimmed. The shadows of winter evening drew close around the Inquisitor. He warily opened the next report. and tried to concentrate. The creature galloped tirelessly up the valley, racing over the scree, bounding over rocks and streams. It broke its course once to devour a large grazing rodent, and by the time it had finished absorbing its bulk and reforming its body, the sun was setting. The body was now larger, thicker, less suited for speed, more suited for attack. The creature's neck was losing definition, causing its head to recede into its shoulders. Its maw deepened and widened, drool running off ranks of long, sharp incisors. It now somewhat resembled a crudely flayed wolf. The old monastery squatted at the head of the valley, lined in blood by the setting sun. It was a huge, sprawling building, built centuries ago by Dour people with more interest in solidity than aesthetics, and more zeal for truth and comfort. Men much like Inquisitor Kryptman, in fact. Built into and onto a massive granite crag, it almost seemed a natural extension of the rock itself. When the Imperium rediscovered Kendrick's world, it was decided to use the empty building as their primary communications and administrative stronghold. The creature crouched behind a rock, spying out the place. Its eyes had widened to cope with the fading light, and organ buds waved from its forehead, reading the sense on the air currents. With a soft ripping noise, long hooked claws shot from its paws. Its tail shortened and thickened and sprouted a cruel stinger. As the sun finally sunk behind the monastery, the creature leapt onto the rocks, propelled upwards on its powerful hind legs.
Hunger, hunger, smell large life above. I go up. We recognize this place of stone. Our prey is here. Remember his scent.
Far above, a young guard patrolled the parapets of the monastery, rubbing his hands together to warm them. His lasgun weighed heavily across his shoulder, and he shifted it into a more comfortable position. From his vantage point, he could see down the barren valley into the ranks of the mountains beyond, a dreamscape of misty greys and browns in the fading light. The glow globes sputtered into life, their feeble light making the place really two-dimensional. Defaced statues of forgotten native gods crowned the walls, their shapes worn by weather and time. The young guard paced restlessly up and down the stretch of the battlements. He'd been on patrol for 3 hours now, and the cold winter night had set in. Hearing the wind moan and wail, he shivered and pulled his cloak more tightly around him, feeling hemmed in by stone and shadows. He did not hear the approach of death. As he turned away, something catapulted over the parapet and smashed into the back of his neck, knocking him to the floor. Its warm body enveloped its head. The musky stench was disgusting. He dropped his lasgun and flung his arms up to his head, trying to tear the creature away. Savage claws raked at his throat, trying to open his windpipe. He tried to scream, but all his horror and pain just came as a racking gurgle. His questing hands pulled at the thing, trying to pull it away, but it was slippery with a corrosive fluid. Razor-sharp teeth flayed the skin from his fingers. The pain was terrible, building up inside him with no release. Fire seared through the back of his neck as claws cut deep through the top of his spine, cracking his vertebrae apart. Sensation flared and dimmed. The last thing he felt was something punching through his eye sockets.
Food, warm food, eat and absorb. Grow larger, grow stronger, teeth to tear, claws to rend. Our enemy is here, we hate him, we find him, destroy him. Enter the place of stone, seek out our enemy, hunt him, and destroy him.
The creature reared its body and stretched open its jaws, revealing row upon row of dripping needle-sharp teeth. Swishing its tail from side to side, it went down the steps into the monastery. All that remained of the young guard was a messy pile of torn and bloody clothing, a slimy smear on the stone, and a lonely eyeball. The door to Kryptman's office swung open, admitting a worried Corel. "Where's Astropath Farron?" demanded Kryptman. "Didn't you give him my message?" "Yes, sir. Astropath Farrell said to give you his apologies, but he couldn't leave the astral chamber. They're just too busy. He sent you a coded message scroll and the latest batch of off-planet reports. Astropath Merrill had a fit, sir. He was foaming at the mouth. Yes, Carol, that'll be enough. Stay here while I look through the reports. Carell obediently stood to attention by the door, whilst Kryptman scanned the coded scroll from Farrell. Kryptman knew that the astropath would have come if he could. There must be a major crisis to prevent him. He picked up the scroll and pressed his long index fingers to the runes on either side. The cylinder hummed softly and split open, disgorging a thin sheet of velium. Kryptman peered at the astropath's spidery writing, difficult to read in the dim light. The message read,
Kryptman, too busy to see you. Worsening problems with astro-telepathic communications. Everything is fragmentary, distorted. It's worse trying to send. There's a great impenetrable presence, a psychic void. Not a warp storm, something else. Something utterly alien like nothing we've ever experienced before. A solid darkness, a shadow in the warp, and it is growing. We recoil before it, we cannot fight. We dwindle before its might. Astropath Merrill has foreseen a time of darkness. Come to the astral chamber as soon as you can.
Kryptman put down the velium with a shaking hand. As he released it, the paper discorporated itself into a puff of acrid smoke. Why did he have the sense that events were speeding up beyond his capacity to understand them? And what did he mean, the shadow in the warp? Why did astropaths have to use such flowery language? Why couldn't they just tell you the plain facts? Kryptman picked up the other comms printout and scanned them as fast as he could. Loss of contact with the Darren 6 following increased reports of Stealer activity in the sector. Not the slightest trace of the Lamenters. It is as if they had been wiped out. Which, of course, was to be so unlikely to be considered impossible under normal circumstances. What force could possibly cause an entire chapter of Marines to disappear? A cold fear was growing in the pit of his stomach. He was just starting to read an incomplete account of a devastated research station on a planet in the next system when a disheveled guard burst in. "Inquisitor Kryptman, Haral's been killed!" he cried, white-faced with shock. "There's nothing left but—" Clutching his mouth and making swallowing noises, he blundered back into the passage. "Carell, go with him. Find out what's going on and get back to me as soon as you can." Carell left the door open, and Kryptman heard the alarms go off, their wailing muffled by the labyrinth corridors and the thick stone walls. He opened a drawer and took out his bolt pistol. It was a beautiful weapon, thousands of years old, passed on from Inquisitor to Inquisitor. Its familiar heavy weight in its hand, the fine carvings on the barrel, reassured him, gave him strength. After checking the purity seal was intact, he broke open a case of bolter shells and loaded 15 of them into the gun. The shells were heavy and cold, stamped with the mark of the weapon factories of Mars. He placed the gun on the table and was ready. The creature padded awkwardly down the gloomy corridors of the old monastery, vent-like nostrils flaring, reading the scents carried on the air currents. It was the height of a tall man, but with a much thicker body, its center of gravity lower than a human's. Its two upper arms were short and coarse, glistening with raw tendons and skinless muscle. Neck and shoulders had virtually fused together, and its face, mostly composed of its ferocious gaping maw, seemed to be sinking down to its torso. A rudimentary limb stuck out from the top of his head, from which extended a crude, three-fingered clawed hand. Its back legs too had shortened and broadened, and a secondary tail reached forward towards them, tipped with a hard, horny substance. The backbone also ended in a muscular tail, which curled upwards and backwards. Corrosive venom dripped from its tip, leaving tiny pockmarks in the flagged stone floor. Flexible plates ran down its back, and when it moved, they pulsed, phosphorant organs showing through. It excluded a disgusting slime continuously, occasionally shaking off the excess, and leaving a rank and slippery trail in its wake.
Man, body good food, easy to absorb. I am strong. I shall destroy. The prey is close. I have tracked him down. I am the living weapon. We remember this place of cold stone darkness. We remember Kryptman. We come. We are retribution.
Kryptman returned to the reports. There were numerous accounts of extra-normal occurrences, disturbingly similar to those in Kendrick's world. Contact with the side of the Emperor, erratic but possible, just. Some mention of unidentified alien craft spotted by a Space Wolf patrols on the edge of the spiral arm, but then communications lost. Always this problem with communications. 3 more merchant ships were missing, not in the warp, but in normal space. New outbreaks reported Steel occult activity. All these things could be taken as isolated incidents, but he was convinced there must be a connection. Why couldn't he see it, understand the pattern? Everything whirled around his head. Gene stealers, the lamenters, meteors, monsters, mutilated bodies, the shadow in the warp. His head ached trying to contain all of it. Corell returned to the office, out of breath. "The monastery's not under attack?" asked Kryptman. "No, sir, but whatever killed Harel is now in the building. There was a slimy trail of footprints leading down to the lower steps. All the guards are looking for it, but it could be anywhere." He made an encompassing gesture of helplessness. Kryptman understood the problem. The monastery was so huge and rambling that they were still discovering new areas in it. Assuming the invader didn't lose himself and starve to death, it could hide out indefinitely. Corell dropped 3 heavy iron bars across the door to secure it. Drawing his last pistol from its concealed holster under his robes, he took up guard by the door, weapon in hand. Kryptman hoped that the guards could deal with the invader quickly. He should be supervising the hunt himself, but he had to go and talk to Astropath Farron first. With a sudden wrenching impact, the door splintered open, throwing wood and steel across the room. The creature leapt in and gathered itself to attack. Kryptman was stunned by the creature's dramatic entrance and horrific appearance. He stood motionless for the first few fatal seconds. Looking into the black, glittering eyes, he saw himself, his scarred face broken into a myriad of tiny images. He knew this creature wanted him, wanted to kill him, and this creature knew it had found its prey. He grabbed wildly for his bolter, knocked it off the desk onto the floor. Seeing its opportunity, the creature started towards him, propelling itself forward with an odd, bounding, striding motion. Corell leapt between the monster and Kryptman, firing his last pistol at point-blank range. It turned at him with incredible speed for its ungainly shape, clasping his head, smashing both arms against it, and crushing his skull. Gobbets of brain and bone fragments fountained across the room. Continuing the motion, it swept Corell's body into the air and hurled it with tremendous force into the ceiling, breaking his bones with a sickening crunch. Corell's intervention had gained the Inquisitor enough time to retrieve his bolter from the floor. He leaped to his feet and opened fire. The shell exploded from his weapon and tore into the creature's back in a ball of smoke and yellow flame. The bolter bucked in his hand, the recoil jarring his arms. Amazingly, the creature seemed undamaged, or at least unbothered by the wound. It turned and charged at Kryptman, its clawed arms raised, its teeth bared. Instinctively, he kicked over the chair and flung himself to the ground, rolling under the desk as the creature landed on top of it with a crunch. He fired blindly through the wood and rolled out on the other side. He came out of his roll in a fluid motion, simultaneously firing another shell at the creature, which had jumped down to the other side of the desk. This attack had some kind of effect, ripping away part of its spine to explode the muscle and spraying the far wall with red mucus. Enraged, the creature opened its mouth and screamed a horrid gurgling cry, then lifted the edge of its desk and sent it crashing towards the Inquisitor. Kryptman couldn't move out the way fast enough. He was knocked over. One of his legs caught under the heavy desk. He fired wildly as he fell, but his shot missed and exploded through the window, spraying shards of glass everywhere. Before he could pull his leg free, the creature had jumped on him, scribbling and clawing at his body, trying to pinion his arms. "Mighty Emperor, give me strength," prayed Kryptman, struggling to escape the steely grip of the claws. As the creature's grip on him tightened, it stabbed at him with its forward-thrusting tail, trying to spike open his chest. Kryptman realized the creature was slowly, irreversibly drawing him closer to it, towards its gaping maw. The fetid, rank odor it inhaled made him gag. The creature forced him up to his mouth. Kryptman, in a superhuman effort, managed to free his right arm and fire the bolt gun straight down the creature's mouth. The shell shot down the creature's throat and exploded inside its body. The creature was torn apart from the inside. Chunks of flesh and bone rained over the room. Kryptman was flung violently back towards the wall. He felt his ribs go in a lance of pain. The whole attack had taken but a few seconds. Kryptman was dizzy with the ferocity of it. The immediate danger passed. His adrenaline high wore off, and he doubled over from the pain. The right arm was broken, several ribs cracked, Burns ran down the right side of his body. Corell's headless and broken form lay under the window, one smooth hand still clasped around his last pistol. Kryptman gently pried loose the young man's nerveless fingers and deactivated the weapon. He had been genuinely fond of the boy, and now he owed Corell his life, and had no way of repaying the debt. Staggering over to the remains of his desk, Kryptman fumbled through the wreckage, looking for sim pills and painkillers. His foot slipped on some bloody bit of the alien carcass, and he fell into the chair, gasping with pain. What had been this creature? Why had it been sent to kill him? Who had sent it? He had no doubts that the creature had been instructed to do so. However, unlike a mindless monster, it had attacked with ruthless efficiency, refusing to be distracted, as though guided by some cold and calculating alien intelligence. The mixture of stimulants and painkillers was making him feel heady. A terrible understanding assaulted his consciousness. This creature is the link, he realized. Somehow this creature connects all these events, all the weird happening. He could almost see the pattern, and the Imperium must be warned. Clasping his tattered black jacket around him, Kryptman staggered painfully out of the office, heading towards the astral chamber. Astropath Merrill was lying in a cot outside the astral chamber, the whites of his eyes rolled up, mumbling endlessly about the shadow in the warp. Kryptman tried unsuccessfully to soothe him, then gave up. Merrill was beyond any help he could give. The chamber was a great spherical vault, its high ceiling lost in shadow. Ornate marble couches, evenly spaced across the outer wall, pointed into the center of the room, where the podium of the chief astropath was positioned. On every couch, but one, lay an astropath. The ends of the couches were inserted into the wall, so the psychers' heads were hidden. The chamber was lit with red dim light, and when Kryptman entered, he had the impression that the grey-clad bodies of the astropaths were floating in a great circle around him. Farron, looking harassed, strode down from the podium to meet him. He looked very old and tired, his fine grey hair dishevelled. Kryptman quickly explained the situation, outlined his theory, stressed the gravity of the threat. To his surprise, the astropath took him perfectly seriously, saying nothing, just nodding his head thoughtfully. As they discussed how best to communicate the situation to the Imperium, they were interrupted by the astropath, who had finally managed to contact the Size of the Emperor.
The Size of the Emperor are under heavy attack. They don't know how much longer they can hold out. The situation is critical. They must have support. Wait, they're sending us a warning.
The astropath's breathing was fast and laboured. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he struggled to maintain contact with the beleaguered Marine chapter. Farron reached out a hand to support him.
Warn them! Warn them! The Tyranids are coming! The Tyranids are coming!
With a hoarse scream, the astropath fell to the floor, clutching his head. Simultaneously, the bodies of the other astropaths jolted onto the couches as they too broke psychic contact, the strain too great for them to bear any longer. One of them plunged over to Farron and Kryptman.
The shadow in the warp! The shadow in the warp is too strong. We can't break through. It's inhuman.
He broke down and slumped to the floor, sobbing. The nights in the astral chamber flickered on and went out. Farron and Kryptman stood in the middle of the room, the shadowy forms of the astropaths lurching and moaning around them like lost souls. They looked at each other, their grim faces illuminated by the glowing ruins of the machinery. Tyranids! Tyranids, breathed Kryptman in horror. Another Hive Fleet! For the first time in his life, the Inquisitor was truly afraid.
What you've just listened to is a non-profit fan reading of Inquisitor Kryptman, read by Adam Nicol. For more audio readings and audiobooks, visit www.oldoralhouse.co.uk.